My name is Jordan, and I worked the overnight shift at a 24-hour McDonald's. It wasn't a terrible job. In fact, I actually enjoyed it. Most nights were quiet, and aside from the occasional late-night rush, there wasn't much to do once the dining room closed. After 9 p.m., we served customers exclusively through the drive-thru, which meant the lobby became a silent, brightly lit room that seemed completely separate from the world outside. I won't pretend I was the hardest worker. I liked having time to sit around, talk with my coworkers, and do as little as possible when things were slow. The overnight crew was small, but we got along well. We joked around, listened to music, and tried to make the long hours pass as quickly as possible. One Tuesday night, business was unusually slow. That was fortunate because we were severely understaffed. Only 3 of us had shown up, including me. The parking lot was nearly empty, and the restaurant felt strangely quiet. Every few minutes, the soft hum of the refrigerators and the distant buzz of the fluorescent lights seemed louder than they should have been. At approximately 2:30 a.m., we heard someone knocking on the front door. The dining room doors were locked every night at 9, so anyone knocking at that hour was usually either intoxicated, looking for help, or unaware that the lobby was closed. I expected to find a drunk person or someone asking for money. As I walked toward the entrance, I glanced through the glass and recognized the man standing outside. It was Jared, a former employee who had been fired several weeks ago. I never knew exactly why. I hadn't been close to him. We'd exchanged a few casual greetings when our shifts overlapped, but I remembered him well enough. What unsettled me was how different he looked. His face was pale and hollow, with dark circles beneath his eyes. His clothes were wrinkled, stained, and looked as though he had been wearing them for days. A heavy backpack hung from one shoulder, bulging in a way that made it difficult to tell what was inside. He kept looking over his shoulder toward the parking lot, as if he expected someone to appear behind him. I should have left the door locked. Instead, because I recognized him, I opened it a few inches and kept the security latch in place. "What's up, man?" I asked. "What are you doing here this late?" Jared didn't answer immediately. He stared past me into the restaurant, scanning the empty lobby and the kitchen beyond it. His breathing was quick and shallow. "I need to use the bathroom," he said. "Just for a few minutes. I won't be long." He sounded exhausted. His voice was quiet and strained, almost as if he were afraid someone might hear him. I hesitated. Given his appearance, I wondered if he was planning to use drugs in the restroom. Still, I moved aside. "Fine," I said. "But don't take forever. You know we aren't supposed to let anyone in after closing." Jared pushed through the opening without thanking me. He moved quickly, keeping his head down, and disappeared into the bathroom. One of my coworkers looked at me skeptically. "Why did you let him in?" they asked. "It's just Jared," I said. "He used to work here on first shift. He just needs to use the bathroom." Saying it aloud made the situation sound even stranger. Why would someone show up at his former workplace in the middle of the night, carrying an overstuffed backpack and looking like he hadn't slept in days, just to use the bathroom? 5 minutes passed, then 8, then nearly 10. The bathroom door remained closed. I tried to convince myself that everything was normal, but an uncomfortable pressure had begun building in my chest. Finally, I walked over and carefully pushed the door open a couple of inches. The smell reached me first. It was metallic and sharp. Inside, Jared stood hunched over the sink. He was scrubbing a towel beneath the running water. The towel was soaked dark red, and diluted blood spiraled down the drain. For a moment, I couldn't move. Then Jared reached into his backpack and pulled out a knife. The blade was smeared with blood. He held it under the faucet and began washing it. His movements were slow and deliberate. He wasn't frantic. He wasn't panicking. He was cleaning it as casually as someone rinsing a coffee mug. My phone suddenly began ringing in my pocket. The sound exploded through the tiny bathroom. Jared's head snapped toward the door. I pulled it shut and hurried away, trying not to make a sound. My heart pounded so hard I was certain he could hear it. I stood behind the counter, pretending to work, while silencing my phone in my pocket. When it finally stopped, the restaurant fell silent again. A couple of minutes later, Jared emerged. He walked toward me with his hands trembling, but his expression was strangely blank. When he stopped in front of me, he stared without blinking. "Everything all good, man?" I asked, forcing a weak smile. His eyes remained fixed on mine. I couldn't maintain eye contact, so I looked down and pretended to adjust my shoelaces. Very quietly, he asked, "What did you see?" I looked up. "What do you mean?" His hands began shaking harder. "Tell me what you saw." I struggled to answer. My mouth felt dry and my words came out unevenly. "It looked like you were washing blood off a towel," I said. "I don't really know what I saw. It's none of my business anyway." Jared's face tightened. He leaned slightly closer. "Take the trash out to the dumpster," he said. I stared at him. "Don't tell the cops. Don't tell anyone." His voice dropped to a whisper. "If you do, I'll kill you. Do you understand?" I couldn't speak, so I simply nodded. Jared turned and walked out through the front door. I locked it behind him and watched through the glass as he crossed the parking lot. He didn't hurry. He didn't look back. He just kept walking until the darkness swallowed him. For several minutes I stood there unable to move. Then I forced myself to do what he had told me. I went into the bathroom and grabbed the trash bag. There were a few small spots of blood near the sink, and I wiped them away with disinfectant until the surface looked clean. I replaced the liner, carried the bag outside, and threw it into the dumpster. The entire time, I kept expecting to see Jared standing somewhere beyond the reach of the parking lot lights. He wasn't there. That almost made it worse. I finished the shift without telling anyone. I tried to behave normally, but my hands shook so badly that I dropped a box of cups twice. When morning finally came, I drove home and lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. I kept asking myself the same question. What had Jared done? There might have been an explanation, some ordinary explanation that I was too frightened to see, but I couldn't stop thinking about the way he had cleaned the blade of the knife. By the following night, I was exhausted. I went to work at my usual time, hoping that the entire incident would begin to feel unreal once I was back around other people. Instead, I spent the first several hours flinching at every sound. Around midnight, I saw someone approaching the entrance. The figure moved slowly through the parking lot. Even before he reached the door, I knew who it was. It was Jared. Panic took over. I hurried into the bathroom and locked myself inside a stall. I could hear a knock at the front door. Only a minute later, one of my coworkers opened the bathroom door. "Hey Jordan," they called. "Jared's outside. He wants to talk to you for a minute." I pressed my hands against my chest. My heart was racing, and I could barely breathe. "Tell him I'll be out in a minute," I mumbled. I sat there sweating, listening to the muffled sound of voices near the entrance. I considered calling the police. I considered calling my parents. But every time I reached for my phone, I imagined Jared discovering what I was doing. Eventually, I forced myself to stand. I took several slow breaths, left the bathroom, and walked toward the front door. Jared was waiting outside beneath the buzzing security light. He looked worse than he had the night before. His eyes were red and his face was expressionless. He didn't greet me. "Did you tell anyone?" he asked. "No," I replied immediately. "Of course not." He studied me for several seconds. Then he lifted his shirt. A handgun was tucked into the waistband of his pants. My stomach dropped. "Good," he said. "Because if you told anyone, then I was going to kill you tonight." He let the shirt fall back into place. "Let's make sure we keep it that way, okay?" I nodded. Jared turned away and walked into the darkness. I remained outside until I could no longer see him. Then I rushed back inside, locked the door, and checked it twice. I spent the rest of the shift watching the parking lot. Every shadow looked like a person. Every passing car made me think he had returned. When my shift finally ended, I drove home without stopping anywhere. Again, I thought about calling the police. I thought about telling my manager. I thought about telling my family, but fear kept stopping me. I was terrified that Jared would find out, and even more terrified that he had already been watching me. That morning, I texted my boss and quit. I never explained why. I never reported what happened. To this day, I don't know whose blood was on that towel, why Jared had a knife, or what was inside his backpack. What I do know is that I could never continue working at that McDonald's again. This happened last month, shortly after I got my first job at a gas station. I was 20 years old and had been out of high school for more than 2 years without doing much with my life. I wasn't in college, I didn't have a career plan, and most days consisted of gaming in my bedroom or hanging out with friends. My dad had finally run out of patience. He told me I needed to get a job or move out. A week later, I was hired for the overnight shift at a gas station a few miles from our house. The job was easy. I learned how to operate the register, activate the pumps, restock the shelves, and clean the bathrooms. Most nights were so slow that I spent hours sitting behind the counter watching videos or playing games on my phone. It was easy money. Sometimes, I even wondered why I hadn't started working sooner. That changed during my 4th week. It was a little after 2 a.m. on a Thursday when a dark SUV pulled into the station. The vehicle stopped at one of the pumps, but the driver didn't get out right away. I glanced up from my phone and watched the headlights wash across the empty parking lot. After a few minutes, the passenger door opened. A woman stepped out. She was probably in her 30s, with long blonde hair and a striking appearance. She wore tight clothes and a thin jacket that seemed inappropriate for the chilly night. Under the bright canopy lights, she looked almost unreal. She walked into the store with a confident smile and said hello. I smiled back and nodded. She slowly wandered through the aisles, picking up items and putting them back without seeming interested in buying anything. Every few seconds she glanced toward me. At first, I assumed she was just being friendly. Then she began smiling whenever our eyes met. Finally, she walked up to the register and leaned against the counter. "Baby," she said, drawing out the word. "Are you here all by yourself?" I felt my face heat up. "Yeah," I said. "I work overnight." "You look too young to be running this place." "I'm not that young," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "I'm 20, she smiled. 20? That's still young." There was something strange about the way she said it, not flirtatious exactly, more like she was testing how easily I could be embarrassed. She bought a bottled drink and a pack of cigarettes, then lingered at the counter instead of leaving. "Do you always work alone, cutie?" she asked. "Yes, usually," I responded as my smile got bigger. "Doesn't that scare you?" I laughed awkwardly. "Not really. Nothing ever happens here." Her expression changed for just a moment. "No," she said softly. "I guess nothing ever happens." Then she turned and walked back outside. I watched her through the window as she approached the SUV. The driver's side window lowered, but I couldn't see the person inside. She leaned toward the opening and appeared to say something to the driver. A few seconds later, she turned around and came back inside. "The pump isn't working, baby," she said. "Which one?" "Number 4. It took my card, but nothing happened." I checked the monitor behind the register. Pump 4 showed as active. I said, "I'll take a look." She smiled again. "Thanks, baby." I hesitated. I was supposed to remain behind the counter whenever possible, but the station was empty and the pump appeared to be malfunctioning. I grabbed the small flashlight we kept beneath the register and followed her outside. The air felt colder than it had a minute earlier. The parking lot was empty, except for the SUV. Its engine was still running. The woman walked beside me toward pump 4. "Where did you insert the card?" I asked. She pointed to the reader. I leaned closer and shined my flashlight over the keypad. Nothing appeared damaged. The screen looked fine to me. I took a closer look, not exactly knowing what I was looking for, when behind me I heard a door open from the SUV. I turned slightly, but the woman quickly grabbed my attention before I could see who was opening the door. She began to point at the card reader, and I didn't know what she wanted me to do since she didn't say anything. Again, I bent toward the card reader to take a closer look. That was when something struck the back of my head. The impact was enormous. A bright burst of white filled my vision, followed by a loud ringing in my ears. My knees gave out, and I collapsed against the side of the pump. For a few seconds I was conscious but unable to move. I could see the woman's shoes near my face. Someone else stood behind her, a man. I couldn't make out his features, only his silhouette beneath the canopy lights. He was holding something heavy in one hand. "Is he out?" the man asked. The woman crouched beside me and waved a hand in front of my face. "He's breathing," she said. "He'll be out for a while." I tried to speak, but my mouth wouldn't work. My arms felt disconnected from my body. The ringing in my ears grew louder until their voices became distant and distorted. The man looked toward the store, then began to approach it. He said he's alone. That was the last thing I heard before everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the pavement beside the pump. At first, I didn't know where I was. My head throbbed violently, and my cheek was pressed against the cold concrete. The canopy lights above me flickered in and out of focus. I tried to sit up and immediately became nauseated. The dark SUV was now gone. I stumbled to my feet and hurried toward the store, gripping the side of the building for support. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the place looked as though it had been torn apart. Shelves had been emptied. Cigarettes, lottery tickets, alcohol, snacks, batteries, and electronics were missing. The cash register drawer had been forced open, and the safe beneath the counter was damaged. Several displays had been pulled from the walls and dragged toward the entrance. The security monitor was dark. They had taken the recording system too. I reached for the telephone, but before I could dial, a car pulled into the parking lot. It was my manager. He had come in early to check the store before the morning shift. The moment he entered, he stared at me. "What in the hell happened?" he demanded. I tried to explain, but I was confused and slurring my words. I told him about the woman, the broken pump, and the man behind me. I told him I had been attacked outside by the pumps. He looked past me at the empty shelves and the destroyed register. Then he looked back at my phone, which was still on the counter. "You left the store unattended?" he asked. "I was checking the pump." "For how long?" he shouted. "I don't know. They hit me in the back of my head and I blacked out." He didn't seem to believe me. The police and paramedics arrived shortly afterward. I was taken to the hospital, where doctors diagnosed me with a concussion and several staples in the back of my head. When I was released, my manager called me. He declared that I had violated policy by leaving the store unsecured. According to him, I had either been negligent or involved in the theft, and then he fired me. The police never found the SUV, the woman, or the man who attacked me. Without the security footage, there was very little evidence beyond my injuries and my story. The worst part is that I still remember the woman's face clearly. I remember how she smiled at me through the glass. I remember the way she called me baby. And I remember the exact moment her expression changed when I followed her outside. To be honest, even if I hadn't been fired, I don't think I could have brought myself to work there again after what happened. Whenever I pass that station now, my stomach begins to tighten. That gas station may look ordinary to everyone else, but to me, it will always be where my life changed in a matter of seconds. My name is Jimmy, and this happened to me in Boston in 2012. At the time, I worked as a janitor at a high school. I had spent several years working during the day, cleaning classrooms and hallways while students and teachers moved around me. The daytime shift was exhausting. Constant noise, slammed lockers, shouting, ringing bells, and people stopping me every few minutes to ask for something. Eventually, I transferred to the overnight shift. Compared to the day shift, working at night felt almost peaceful. I swept and mopped the hallways, emptied trash cans, wiped down classrooms, and reset desks and chairs for the following morning. Similar to the day shift, but much better in my opinion. Another benefit was that I could take breaks whenever I needed to, and the building was so quiet that I could actually hear the hum of the vending machines from the opposite end of the hall. I also used my breaks to call my sister, Jen. She suffered from insomnia, so she was usually awake whenever I called. We had gotten into a routine of talking while I took my break to eat. Sometimes we discussed family problems, sometimes old memories, and sometimes nothing important at all. Hearing her voice made the enormous empty school feel less lonely. On one particular night, my shift started normally. I had finished cleaning most of the West Wing and was sitting in a classroom during my break, eating a snack while Jen talked about some of her struggles at her job. Just then, I heard a loud thump down the hallway. The sound was heavy and echoed through the halls. I asked Jen to hold on for a minute while I peeked out into the hallway. The hallway stretched in both directions, dimly lit by a few fluorescent fixtures. I saw no one. Maybe something fell, I told Jen. I'll call you right back. I ended the call and stepped into the hall. For the next few minutes I listened. The school seemed to be holding its breath. No footsteps, no voices, not even the usual clicks and groans from the heating system. Then I heard it again. Another loud thump, and this time, I heard it come from the far end of the hallway. I walked toward the sound, trying to convince myself that it was nothing. The closer I got, the more aware I became of every noise I made. The squeak of my shoes, the jingle of my keys, the quiet rasp of my breathing. The sound seemed to be coming from the last classroom at the end of the hall. I pushed the door open and swept my flashlight around the room. Desks stood in neat rows. A whiteboard covered one wall. Student artwork hung crookedly near the windows. Nothing appeared out of place. That's when I noticed it. One of the windows was open. Cold air poured into the classroom, carrying the smell of rain and wet pavement. I approached the window and looked outside. The courtyard was completely dark. Tree branches whipped back and forth in the wind, but I saw no person, no movement, and no sign of anyone who could have climbed inside. I pulled the window closed and locked it. That was when I heard the closet door creak. I turned slowly. The closet stood at the back of the classroom, its narrow wooden door opening by itself. The hinges groaned as the door moved an inch at a time. For a moment, I could see only darkness inside. Then someone stepped out. He wore black clothing and had a hood pulled over his face. Before I could react, a second figure emerged behind him. Both men were dressed in black from head to toe, their faces hidden in the shadows. They didn't speak or rush toward me. They simply stood there watching. I remember thinking that the silence was worse than a shout. Then one of them moved. I quickly bolted through the classroom door and sprinted down the hallway. I had gone perhaps 50 feet when I heard them chasing me. Their shoes pounded against the floor behind me, growing louder with every step. I ducked into another classroom and slammed the door shut and locked it. The first impact came almost immediately. The door shook in its frame. I shoved a desk against it. The men struck the door again and again. The sound echoed through the empty school, turning every hallway into an amplifier. I pressed back against the barricade, trying to hold it in place. That was when I reached into my pocket for my cell phone. It was gone. I searched my other pocket, then checked my jacket. Nothing. I must have dropped it while running. The realization made the panic inside me explode. I was trapped in a classroom with two strangers on the other side of the door, and the one thing that could have connected me to the outside world was lying somewhere out in the hallway. I searched the teacher's desk, cabinets, and supply shelves for anything I could use as a weapon. The best I found was a pair of scissors. I gripped them so tightly that the handles dug into my palm. Then, without warning, the banging stopped. The silence that followed was unbearable. I waited for the men to speak. I waited for footsteps. I waited for the door to splinter. Nothing happened. I stayed behind the desk for what felt like hours, barely moving. At one point, I heard a faint sound somewhere outside, perhaps a footstep, perhaps the building settling. Another time, I thought I heard someone breathing on the other side of the door. I didn't dare check. Eventually, I looked at the clock hanging on the back wall of the classroom. 2 whole hours had passed. I began to wonder if they had left. Maybe they had gotten tired of waiting. The thought of remaining in that classroom until morning frightened me almost as much as the thought of opening the door. I couldn't stay in here forever. I slowly moved the desk away from the door. Every scrape sounded deafening. Then I unlocked the door and turned the handle as carefully as I could. The door opened a few inches. The hallway was empty. I waited, then opened it wider and stepped out. The lights overhead were flickering weakly. I looked down the corridor, searching for my cell phone, but I couldn't see it anywhere. I wanted to find it, but survival mattered more. I decided to head for the front entrance and reach my car in the parking lot. I started walking quickly. As I approached an intersecting hallway, I glanced around the corner. One of the hooded men stood there. He was about 20 yards away. For an instant, neither of us moved. Then he shouted, "He's over here!" The second man shouted something from behind me, but I was already running. Instead of heading towards the main entrance, I cut toward the stairwell. A fire exit was located there, and it was much closer than the front doors. I shoved my hands into my pockets, searching for my keys while sprinting. The hooded men were gaining ground. I could hear them breathing heavily. Their footsteps struck the floor with a steady, relentless rhythm. I found my keys and fumbled through them as I reached the stairwell. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped them to the floor before finding the key to the emergency exit. I shoved it into the deadbolt and twisted. The lock opened. I threw the door outward and slammed it behind me, locking it again, thinking I was finally safe. Then a loud thump hit the door. I could see the man behind the narrow rectangular window in the door. His face was nearly pressed up against the glass. He wasn't shouting anymore. He was smiling. That much I could see. I began to run across the pavement towards the parking lot. In the middle of my sprint towards freedom, the sound of a gunshot made my ears ring. A bullet struck the concrete less than 5 feet away, sending tiny fragments of stone against my leg. I threw myself into my car, locked the doors, and started the engine. I didn't stop to check whether the men had come outside. I sped away from the school and drove straight to the police station. When I ran inside, I was barely able to explain what had happened. I finally gathered my words and told the officers there were at least 2 armed men inside the school and that they had fired at me while I escaped. I gave my statement for nearly an hour. Then one of the officers returned, holding my cell phone. It was found on the hallway floor, and it was undamaged. The police continued to investigate the school that night while I waited at the station. The men had fled and were nowhere to be found. Police determined that they had broken in through a side entrance near the library and somehow disabled the security system without shutting off the power. They had stolen laptops, equipment, and supplies from several classrooms and the library. The principal told me I could have 2 weeks of paid vacation for my troubles. I never went back to that school. After the trauma I experienced, I could never bring myself to work another night shift. Although the idea of peace and quiet had once sounded appealing, I came to prefer noise and crowded environments because they felt safer. Some things can't ever be forgotten. Even in your dreams, the memory returns, the panic, the silence, and the knowledge that you were never truly safe, and it haunts you forever. Thank you for listening to the Dark Side Diaries. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving me a like and subscribe for more content.